Hello and welcome to Say in the City. My name is SatC, and today we are breaking down the 10th episode of Sex in the City. The Baby Shower was directed by the returning Susan Seidelman and written by Terry Minsky, who will go on to create Lizzie McGuire in 2001 and Andy Mack in 2017. She'll also write for the Carrie Diaries, and she'll write one more episode next season. As we open up the episode, we see an unidentified hand writing Carrie's real fake address with excellent penmanship. Carrie tells us, let's be honest, sometimes there is nothing harder in life than being happy for someone else, like lottery winners or extremely successful people who are 27. And then there's that hell on earth that only your closest friends can inflict on you. The baby shower. This is probably my favorite opening narration so far. We cycle through Carrie, Samantha, Charlotte, and Miranda, all receiving and reacting to the same sized white envelope and card. This is our first peek at Sam's apartment outside of her bedroom, which we'll come back to later in the episode. Charlotte's and Miranda's bedrooms are the same ones we've seen throughout the season. After Miranda's reaction, we finally reveal the package, a baby shower invitation. And I'll be honest, this invitation is classy as fuck. It's obviously custom since not that many people have the name Lainey, but it is very traditional, which we'll come back to later. This brings us to all of the girls crammed onto Carrie's bed like sardines, watching a movie and eating some popcorn. And honestly, I'm uncomfortable just watching them, but trying to get 4 people together to watch that tiny ass TV is like the most 90s thing we've seen since Skipper's cell phone in episode 2. Miranda's going to have a lot of feelings and quotes that will come up a few times throughout the series, and let's just get this out of the way now. We're finally getting some consistent storylines for all of these women. I think we took a couple of detours to get here, but sometimes it's the journey and not the destination, or whatever that saying is. Samantha says, frankly, I think it's sad the way she's using a child to validate her own existence. And I love Charlotte's facial expression as Sam says this. Carrie responds, why can't she just use sex and a nice cocktail like the rest of us? She says it so dryly, and I like these kind of meta, self-referential moments. We'll get a bigger one here soon. Carrie asks the group,
can I ask you, would any baby shower bother you, or is this one worse because it's Lainey's?
We then come to the, I believe, only flashback of the entire series, which is good, and we'll see why. Yes, I know we technically had flashbacks in a few episodes, but those were just weeks or months. This one seems to be 8 years ago. During the flashback, we meet Lainey Berlin at Samantha's party. Judas Priest's You've Got Another Thing Coming plays throughout this blue light special, which just goes to show that bad lighting is always in for a house party. Why is there this crazy blue light? The wigs, honey. Miranda is definitely wearing a wig. It's a little too shiny, and the bangs really give it away. And it also looks like they brought back Carrie's bad extensions we saw in The Monogamists. Samantha either has a wig on, or they just added some hair extensions because she does not have that much bang in her bangs. And the teasing in her hair is a little Jersey for me. Carrie is apparently working at Coyote Ugly, while Miranda is giving Miami Vice, and Samantha is giving Peg Bundy. Real quick though, what is up with that fucking hat on Carrie? I think this may be the worst outfit we're going to see on her this season, which is kind of forgivable since she's supposed to be in her mid-20s. Lainey is played by Dana Wheeler Nicholson, most well known for her earlier film roles as Gail Stanwyck in 1985's Fletch and Maddie Earp in 93's Tombstone. She's also had some larger roles in television as Beverly O'Connor in Nashville and Angela Collette in Friday Night Lights. Carrie tells us Lainey did A&R for a record label, or as she used to call it, sex with an expense account. Every time she went on a scouting trip, she came back with some hot new group and a gynecological condition no one had ever heard of. So A&R stands for Artists and Repertoire, the department that scouts, develops, and finances new artists, which makes Carrie's description of her scouting trips incredibly problematic. After the countless horror stories we've heard recently about young artists being preyed upon in the music industry, everything about Lainey is just bad up to this point. But I digress. We'll get more reasons to hate Lainey later. One thing I do appreciate about Lainey is that we all know this woman. especially in our 20s. The wild girl with no sexual hang-ups, wearing leather, and making out with everyone. We find out this is Samantha's apartment because she says, "So help me, she fucks on my couch, she buys it." A line that will come back later. We also find out that apparently Lainey's party trick is stripping, which will become important later, but I love Wheeler Nicholson's acting here. She's clearly fishing for everyone to encourage her nudity. In response to the striptease, we get some discussion about self-esteem that never really comes up again, at least not in this context. Sure, Miranda says, "You know, I have low self-esteem, but I express it the healthy way by eating a box of double stuffed Oreos." Miranda's low self-esteem is one of her defining character traits until arguably season 5. However, I believe this is the only time that they'll explicitly tell us that Samantha's confidence and sexual prowess are because of her low self-esteem. Carrie tells us Samantha and Lainey had a long-standing rivalry, both wild, both sexy, both incredibly insecure. So this does explain her uncharacteristic response to Jerry in the previous episode, but I don't love the implication that single women who enjoy sex are just insecure. But I'll put a pin in this for now. Carrie tells us 2 years ago, Lainey did the most shocking thing of all. She met a Wall Street investment banker, married him, and moved to Connecticut. That wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to have sex with Sid Vicious and move to heroin. Sid Vicious was the bassist for the British punk band Sex Pistols. He is most famous for his wild partying and self-destructive tendencies. While he's the clearest and most obvious choice for poor life choices, he did die in 1979. So maybe she could have said Steven Tyler or Tommy Lee, really any of the living rockers who had pretty well documented partying. Now, I'm pretty sure we have a body double here for Lainey. We get this shot between her legs that we'll get a callback to a few times throughout the series, including once more in this episode. It's weirdly one of my favorite shots, even if the flashback scene is so out of place for the series. I totally get why the flashback was necessary, but I think there's a reason this is the first and only one we get. This is apparently a party from 8 years ago, which would have been in 1990, and they kind of had to shoot this as a house party with limited extras because so much changes in 8 years. Fashion, decor, pop culture references, not to mention the age of the actors. And speaking of the extras, there are some fun fashion choices here. We have some Madonna references and some black boy band references, including someone wearing snow bibs, as well as someone wearing an oversized button-up shirt. We also see someone in a skin-tight t-shirt that you just know is a material like nylon. But again, this is the blue light special, so that we don't actually notice that the actors are all the same age they are in the present day. We're supposed to be looking at 24 or 25-year-old Miranda and Carrie and 32-ish-year-old Samantha. Lainey would most likely be in her late 20s, since the actor is closer to Kim Cattrall's age than SJP's. But as we can see, you can only do so much with lighting, bad hair pieces, and costume design. All of that being said, it makes for one of the most memorable opening scenes of the series. Miranda tells us a bit more about why she's so anti-baby shower by calling motherhood a cult. They all think the same, dress the same, and sacrifice themselves to the same cause: babies. I love Miranda in this episode, but she mentions that she has 2 sisters, and spoiler alert, no, she doesn't. Anyway, Carrie convinces them all to go by saying,
You're driving down the road, you see a sign, it says two-headed snake, you pull over. Wild Lainey is having a baby shower, you pull over.
Unfortunately, Sam says she wants to go so she can find out how fat Lainey is, which is problematic, but we'll have plenty of instances where we can talk about it, so let's move on. After the girls leave, Carrie, wearing a white tube top by Wayne Rogers, goes to write down the shower in her day planner. We see that this is April 1998, so as always, I'm confused as to the timeline for this season, but it's fine. We also see lunch with Samantha on the 2nd, an AIDS benefit on the 4th, probably with Charlotte. Someone named Katrina has a birthday on the 9th, and then PU from J&R before dinner at Moomba. We've seen J&R before. This is J&R Music World, so I'm guessing the PU means pickup. There's also a slight error when we get the close-up of the calendar because something is scratched out on the 11th, but it wasn't there in the white shot. When she flips the page back to March, we can see a doctor's appointment on the 5th, Daniel's birthday on the 9th, another person we've never met, lunch at Miranda's on the 14th, an address in Brooklyn, 442 West 4th Street, and 10:30 p.m., which is odd because we won't go to Brooklyn until I believe the 6th season. We can also see Lainey's address, which is 77 Groton Street, which doesn't exist, but we also don't get a city here. We also don't see any dates with big in the calendar. Just saying. Carrie says, in between the Versace show and dinner at Moomba, there it wasn't. My period, 4 days late. So a few things here, starting with the Versace show. Gianni Versace, the legendary designer who started the house, was murdered on the steps of his home on the morning of July 15th, the year prior, in 1997. So it's a little uncomfortable to me that they chose to use the Versace brand. Although Gianni's sister Donatella continued the brand after his death, there seems to have been an unspoken agreement to not mention the brand in popular culture until the phenomenon that was the green jungle dress in 2000. That being said, I think this could have been a way for Pat Field, SJP, whomever, to show their support for Donatella's role as creative director. But honestly, I'm probably reading too much into this, so let's get to the next thing, which is Moomba. Moomba opened in November 1997 and famously became known as the place where the celebrity of that moment, Leonardo DiCaprio, often celebrated his post-Titanic fame in the ridiculously exclusive third floor VIP room. It was located in Greenwich Village between Charles and West 10th Street on 7th Avenue South. It controversially closed abruptly in April 2001. And finally, yes, we're in April 1998. Carrie is 4 days late, with her expected date being the 17th, which makes this Tuesday, April 21st. The baby shower is that Saturday. This means that they got the invitation really late for a baby shower. A general rule of thumb is to send out invitations at least 4 to 6 weeks prior to the event. Now, you could argue that they just didn't talk about it until that Tuesday, but I kind of doubt someone like Charlotte would put off RSVPing until this late. This brings us to that Saturday when the girls gather to travel to Connecticut, and this is the perfect opportunity to talk about the book chapters that inspired this episode. Yes, chapters, since this episode takes elements from 2 consecutive chapters. Chapter 10, Downtown Babes Meet Old Greenwich Gals, and Chapter 11, Babes Flee Land of Wives for Night of Topless Fun. Bushnell starts Chapter 10. The pilgrimage to the newly suburbanized friend is one that most Manhattan women have made, and few truly enjoyed. In fact, most come back to the city in an emotional state somewhere between giddy and destroyed. Here follows one such tale. Jolie Bernard used to be an agent who handled rock bands at International Creative Management. 5 years ago, when she wasn't stomping the globe in her cowboy boots, hanging out with rock stars, and sometimes sleeping with them, she lived in New York in a 1-bedroom apartment decorated with black leather couches and a giant stereo system. She had long blonde hair and a tight little body with big tits. And when she came home, she had a million messages on her answering machine. And when she went out, she had money and drugs in her purse. She was kinda famous. And then something happened. No one thought it would, but it did, which just goes to show that you can never tell about these things. She turned 25 and she met this investment banker who worked for Solomon Brothers, and before you knew it, they were married, she was pregnant, and they were moving to Greenwich. So obviously we have Lainey instead of Jolie, but you can see the similarities. Also in the chapter, we meet Miranda, who is described as a 32-year-old cable exec and Jolie's former best friend. The major difference we have here is that the invitations are not for a baby shower. And then, a month ago, the inevitable happened. Little white invitations bordered with tiny purple flowers arrived, summoning 4 of Jolie's city friends to a bridal shower she was hosting at her house. It was being held on a Saturday at 1 p.m., only, as Miranda pointed out, the most inconvenient time and the last thing you want to be doing on your Saturday afternoon, schlepping to Connecticut. Still, the 4 women did agree to go. Miranda, 32, a cable exec, Sarah, 38, who ran her own PR company, Carrie, 34, some sort of journalist, and Belle, 34, a banker, and the only married woman of the group. In the book, they take the train. Carrie is hungover, and they find out that it might be a dry shower because Jolie is in AA, and Miranda and Carrie almost go back to the city as a result. In the show, they've decided to drive, which will be important later. As Carrie walks up, she tells Samantha, "Hey, Nice outfit. Is there going to be some belly dancing at the shower? So the library is open, and I appreciate that Sam volleys right back with a clever little quip. It's moments like this where I can actually appreciate that a gay man is the showrunner. But speaking of Samantha's belly dancing outfit, it has become sort of iconic for Samantha. The top is a knit sweater from Laundry by Shelley Segal, and I do love it so much, but more for what it stands for than the outfit itself. Here is a 40-year-old woman in no bra, midriff showing, and not feeling any shame about her age or body. Of course, it's also worth noting that Kim Cattrall is at least a year older than Samantha, so even better. And I'm pretty sure this is the same jacket we saw Miranda in close to the end of episode 9. We find out that Miranda got Lainey pastel condoms as a gift, which I've totally done the exact same thing, but I think it was for a wedding gift. Sam got her a bottle of scotch after mistakenly reading BYOB as bring your own booze rather than bring your own baby. Honestly, I would 100% also bring my own booze, so that's on Lainey. The bottle that Sam holds up is a Cuddy Sark Scotch. This is a blended Scotch whiskey from Scotland, and you'll see this peppered throughout shows and movies, but I remember it most from 1996's The Associate, where Whoopi Goldberg's character names her fake white investment male persona after this Scotch, Robert S. Cuddy. I love that movie though. I wish it were on streaming. Anyway, Charlotte comes running up with this giant monstrosity of a gift, which I'll talk about soon. This leads to one of my favorite moments of the whole season. I love how they all get in the car before anyone notices that no one got into the driver's seat. So that means I have questions. How do they even get the car without someone with the driver's license? I'm guessing Sam did the actual renting and stuff without Carrie. Also, how do you decide that you're going to rent a car to take up to Connecticut without discussing who's driving? But before we make the trip to Connecticut, I want to mention two things. First, this parking garage is on East 73rd Street between 5th Avenue and Madison Avenue. When we see the girls all in the car, I love that this person comes out of nowhere from 5th Avenue. Second, in Kiss and Tell, Kim Cattrall discussed this scene. The scene where all of us appear in black and go to the baby shower was, to me, the beginning of us forming as a group of actors, as characters, with the writers. We all fell into it without trying to make it happen. It's a wonderful place to be because you're not breathing from your upper chest, you're breathing from your diaphragm. Now, I'm not an actor, but I can understand the importance of diaphragmatic breathing as a speaker. When you're forcing yourself to suck in air, it keeps your tension high and your nerves out of whack and holds back your voice. With proper breath control, actors are able to relax into their characters and deliver dialogue more naturally as a character, which I think we can really see here. And thanks to Kim Cattrall, I started working on breathing exercises so that I don't pass out when I record these. We make our way to Connecticut, with Carrie telling us, as I turned the mid-sized coupe onto Hollyhock Lane, I was struck by how a place so filled with nature could look so unnatural. And it's so funny to me that she describes the Ford Mustang as a mid-sized coupe. She's probably as much of a car person as I am, but unless I'm rapping along to Shoot by Salt and Peppa, I would never refer to a well-known model as a coupe. Also, why is she turning onto Hollyhock Lane, which doesn't exist, when Lainey lives on Groton Street? Also, spoiler alert, does Carrie just request a Mustang every time? They pull up to Lainey's house, which closely matches the description of the one in the book, a white colonial-style house whose value had obviously been increased by the addition of a pointy slate roof and balconies off the second floor. The lawn was very green, and the trees that dotted the yard had borders of pink flowers around their bases. Carrie gets out of the car and says, "Oh, Toto, I don't think we're in Manhattan anymore." This is obviously a reference to The Wizard of Oz, which is a perfect reference for this transition from the city to the suburbs of Connecticut. I always feel a moment of culture shock when I travel into the suburbs for family things or whatever. Like, there is so much grass. And I love how they included these red, yellow, and purple tulips, I think, at the front that match the balloons by the door. The imagery almost feels like an homage to the poppies scene in the 1939 Wizard of Oz, since the poppies were red and pink with the yellow brick road and the Emerald City in the distance. The moment with Charlotte and the dog with the invisible electric fencing also came from the book. They make their way to the house, but Carrie disrupts Charlotte by reminding her to get their gift, gift, and I love how they don't wait for Charlotte, and that Samantha didn't even bother wrapping her gift or putting it in a bag or anything. Obviously, by this point, she knows it's not going to be a gift, but just zero effort. Carrie, Miranda, and Samantha get to the door, and when Lainey opens the door, she's clearly excited, and I'm going back and forth on their screaming reaction when Lainey opens the door. Of course, Lainey is now a basic suburban bitch and screams when she's excited to see people. Of course, the women are going to react to that, but I don't feel like it should have been a happy scream. It should be more of a timid, slightly scared scream, like more of a pure reaction to being in the suburbs and this shriek being the first thing you hear. More of like a throat scream than a head scream, like, ah. Or at least Sam and Miranda. Carrie's pretty neutral about whether she's excited about seeing Lainey, so I guess hers makes sense. They walk in and Lainey introduces her friends Roxanne and Bridget. We don't get a Roxanne in the book, but there is a Bridget and a similar initial interaction among them all. A woman named Bridget Chalmers, Hermes from head to toe, was sipping what looked like a Bloody Mary. "You guys are late. Jolie thought maybe you weren't coming," she said, with that particular breezy nastiness that only women can show to one another. "Well, the train schedule," Sarah shrugged apologetically. "Excuse me, but do we know you?" Miranda whispered in Carrie's ear. That meant, as far as Miranda was concerned, it was war with Bridget from now on. Of course, Lainey immediately starts her passive-aggressive behavior by saying, "Oh, remember that feeling like if you left Manhattan for even a second, you'd fall off the edge of the earth?" But in comes Charlotte, carrying the Bellini baby basket. The women's reactions here tell you exactly how popular this brand was in the late 90s. These fucking things are apparently personalized and would have cost up to $500. Now, Bellini was founded in 1986, but was purchased by private investors, and the brand was relaunched in 2024. Unfortunately, like almost every company these days, they completely sucked the life out of the brand, but I digress. Samantha tells Lainey, "Speaking of Bellinis, I'm going to have a big drink." Jealous? So obviously I love Sam's cleverness here. A Bellini is a cocktail made with Prosecco and peach puree or nectar, so it's not made with scotch, but we don't care. It's the thought that counts. Lainey introduces Carrie and Miranda to Rebecca, Susan, Mindy, and Betsy. Mindy is doing this in vitro thing, which refers to in vitro fertilization, also called IVF. It's a complex series of procedures that can lead to a pregnancy. During IVF, mature eggs are collected from ovaries and fertilized by sperm in a lab. The fertilized egg or eggs are then placed in a uterus. IVF was first introduced in the 1950s, with the first successful birth of a human child occurring in 1978. So it's a little odd that Lainey calls it a thing, like she doesn't know what it is, but that just points to her selfishness and disconnection from this world, which we'll get more into later. There's also a character in the book Marguerite who's doing in vitro. Lainey introduces Harry alongside Betsy. She says, "They're inseparable. They do everything together. We call them our old married couple, except it's not really that funny now that Betsy and her husband are getting divorced." And why does Harry look like Junior from The Problem Child? Also, is Lainey still carrying the scotch that Samantha took away from her? Roxanne comes up and says to Carrie and Miranda, "I love my son. Andy's 11 months old. He is a god, and I tell him so every day." And how do you keep smiling through that? I feel like Miranda could have asked the odds of Roxanne getting called an asshole on Reddit in 30 years. I'm not going to talk about all of the actors in this scene, but Roxanne is played by Robin Rusin, who was in a few things, but she was married to Mike Myers from 2003 to 2006. And fun fact, Myers' iconic SNL character, Linda Richman from the Coffee Talk sketches, was based on Rusin's mother. Lainey opened some gifts with Charlotte right there in the middle of the group, which is not surprising since we already know that Charlotte wants to join the cult someday. But Lainey opens up a baby sleep easy. These things are apparently still around, but only in the Netherlands. And please excuse me while I clear my browser's cache so Instagram doesn't think I'm having a fucking baby. During this excitement, Carrie tells us, "As I watched Lainey tear open a terry cloth baby bib with the same enthusiasm she once reserved for tearing off Rockstar's pants, I couldn't help but wonder, was I next?" This thought prompts some anxiety for Carrie, so she excuses herself to the bathroom. She tells us, "The truth is, I needed to escape. The party had turned into a preview. A preview of a life I didn't know if I was ready for. It looks like she goes to the downstairs bathroom, which is odd because there's a huge photograph of Lainey posing with her pregnant belly. This photo is a recreation of the incredible August 1991 cover of Vanity Fair, in which Demi Moore poses 7 months pregnant with her second child. The photograph was taken by Annie Leibovitz, and it was a pop culture moment. In the book, Carrie finds this in the master bathroom, just off of the master bedroom. She went into Jolie's bedroom. There was a thick white carpet on the floor and photographs everywhere in silver frames. Some professional-looking shots of Lainey in a bathing suit, her long blonde hair swinging over her shoulders. Carrie stared at those photographs for a long time. What was it like to be Jolie? How did it happen? How did you find someone who fell in love with you and gave you all this? She was 34 and she'd never even come close, and there was a good chance she never would. And this was the kind of life she'd grown up believing she would have, simply because she wanted it. But the men you wanted didn't want it, or you. And the men who did want it were too boring. She went into the bathroom, floor to ceiling black marble, a bidet. Maybe suburban husbands wouldn't play ball unless their wives were just washed, unlike guys in the city. Then she almost screamed. There was a 14 by 17 color photograph of Jolie, Demi Moore style, naked save for a skimpy negligee that was open in the front to reveal humongous tits and a huge belly. Jolie was staring proudly into the camera, her hand resting just above her belly button, which had been pushed straight out like a little stem. Carrie flushed the toilet and ran breathless down the stairs. So to me, the master bath is the more appropriate place for this photo, but again, Lainey's selfishness is on full display during her shower. Carrie says, even 7 months pregnant, Lainey couldn't keep her clothes on. Clearly, part of the old Lainey had survived. But I wondered, what was still buried deep inside the mommies downstairs? And this kind of acts as the episode quandary, since we won't get a traditional one this episode. This leads us to some interviews. Rebecca has an internet lover because she's a nymphomaniac holding a baby. This unnamed woman who looks a lot like the married pig patient is a borderline racist. Mindy got off the couch to tell us she's a lesbian. Love, but also, yeah, shoes. Susan is a pothead in Connecticut. How scandalous. Now, I speculated in the 4th episode that the interviews weren't with actual guys, and here, I think these are all imagined by Carrie. Although it would be really fun if they all disclosed these things in the 2 minutes that Carrie spent with them. Carrie meets Miranda outside, and we get a perfect view of her outfit. She's wearing a Marc Jacobs dress and Jenny slippers, and we saw earlier that she's carrying the same Jimmy Choo satin clutch we saw in episode 5. Miranda says one of my favorite lines of all time. I just realized, maybe it's maturity or the wisdom that comes with age, but the witch at Hansel and Gretel, she's very misunderstood. I mean, the woman builds her dream house, and these brats come along and start eating it. Hansel and Gretel is by the Brothers Grimm and is, as John Solo expertly summarizes, the tale of a little boy and girl who get lost in the woods, find a witch with a house made of candy, and push that witch in the oven when she tries to eat them. Now, John Solo does a great breakdown of the tale over on his channel, which I highly recommend if you're into fairy tales, but honestly, justice for the Dreamhouse Witch. I'd love to see her redemption story a la Maleficent or Cruella. We go back inside to find Charlotte helping Lainey clean up the gift wrapping. It's kind of odd to me that Char is wearing all black. Shouldn't she match Miranda's gift? Anyway, she tells Lainey how much she loves her home. Lainey responds, I know it's a big change, but at some point you have to get serious and settle down. I mean, life is not a Jacqueline Suzanne novel. 4 friends looking for life and love in the big city? No. Now, as much as I detest Lainey and her fucking bad attitude, I do appreciate this very meta moment. It almost feels like Terry Minsky is getting ahead of the criticisms that would ultimately come from mostly male critics. As always though, we'll talk about that more in the season 1 retro. Also, we talked about her before, but Jacqueline Suzanne is the author of Valley of the Dolls, which should sound familiar if you watched my episode 4 breakdown. She was the first ever writer to have 3 consecutive #1 novels on the New York Times bestseller list. But she died in September 1974, and she was dragged by critics and other authors throughout her career. I'm guessing Lainey is referring to Valley of the Dolls, since her other novels aren't really about multiple characters. Charlotte finds out that Lainey is planning on naming her baby Shayla if it's a girl, which greatly upsets Charlotte because that's the name Charlotte made up for her daughter when she was 11. Lainey feigns ignorance, and Carrie tells us a complete lie. She remembered. We all remembered. Charlotte had made us all swear never to use it. The psychotic Roxanne helps Lainey gaslight Charlotte by saying it's not that big a deal because she's not even pregnant, to which Charlotte yells, that's not the point. This gets Sam's attention as she emerges from her Bellini-filled afternoon.
What's going on?
She stole my baby name.
You bitch.
Again, we love Samantha. I do have to say it though, this is as much fueled by her friendship with Charlotte as it is by her rivalry with Lainey. But it's such an iconic moment. She didn't even ask Charlotte what she meant. She just had her back immediately. We cut to a bar where Carrie tells us beer and bar nuts at Flanagan's off Route 5 were the perfect antidote to Lainey's House of Humiliation. So maybe they were in Hartford, since they do not want to be on that route if they were in Greenwich. And Orange, where there is a Hollyhock Lane, is also too far west for them to stop here. In the bar, we see neon signs for Miller Lite, Dos Equis, and Budweiser, which are all beers the girls have drank this season and will even drink this episode. We also see a sign for Bud Ice, which is an American adjunct lager-style beer that was introduced in 1994. Charlotte talks about why she's so upset about the name, kind of being our surrogate for Carrie's thoughts in the book before she found the photo. She says, if I hadn't waited this long to have a baby, that name would be mine. And I love that Carrie and Samantha share a look here. We know this look. We've all exchanged this look. It's that look that communicates so much without having to say anything. Here, it's a little bit, oh shit, Charlotte's gonna lose it. And a little bit, let's be kind so she doesn't lose it. Carrie tries to assure her that she has plenty of time to have children, and Charlotte responds, no, I don't. I don't want to be one of those 40-year-old moms. No offense. She directs this to Sam, who quickly responds, well, I don't want to be one of them either. There are no frozen eggs in my freezer. Sam says this as Miranda is walking out of the restroom, which is some slight foreshadowing, but again, I'm not going to spoil anything. Charlotte goes to the restroom, which allows the girls to talk about why they hate baby showers. Miranda says, I spoke to a woman with a master's in finance. All she wanted to talk about was her diaper genie. Part of me doubts Miranda had a long conversation with any of the women, but she probably had this one and then gave up. Anyway, we're going to get another fun reference to the diaper genie in a later episode, but it was actually pretty new to US American consumers in the 90s. Carrie says, oh, come on, you guys. It doesn't have to be like that. You don't have to lose yourself to have a kid. I know plenty of cool, hip mothers who live in the city and who still have careers and stuff. And SJP will become one of those mothers in 2002, but we will definitely talk about that when we get to season 5. This prompts Carrie to reveal that she's late. I'm assuming Carrie is drinking something non-alcoholic, which she easily could have just played off as being the designated driver without tipping anyone off until she's ready. Like if they had waited to get beers until they got back to the city, she would have had to make a choice a bit sooner. This is why they couldn't take the train, or else Carrie would have had to do the whole I'm not drinking thing that always tips off the other characters in shows. And there's definitely a reason that Carrie waited until Charlotte was in the bathroom to tell Sam and Miranda, and I do feel like it's an act of kindness that she didn't talk about it in front of Charlotte. Sure, she would have told her eventually, but we will see how Charlotte reacts to similar news later on in the series, so I think it was the right call. Sam and Miranda assure Carrie that she is still in the gray area, but Miranda asks her if she's going to tell Mr. Big. Carrie says,
No, I am not going to tell him until I know how to finish the sentence.
We come to Charlotte in her bedroom, with Carrie telling us that night Charlotte got out her wish box where she kept reminders of all the things she hoped for in life. A gift for Shayla, a townhouse in the city, a beach house in East Hampton, her dream man, her backup dream man. It's very strange when the life you never had flashes before your eyes. So, as I said, Charlotte is the one going through all of the what ifs about her life, but let's talk about her wish box. First, I noticed that she didn't say anything about a little cottage in Maine. Also, I didn't mention it in the previous episode breakdown, but SJP briefly dated JFK Jr. before meeting her current husband, Matthew Broderick. It's also funny to me that the backup dream man is from a Canali ad. I couldn't find the name of the model. It could be Russell Schiaffolo, but this is from the Canali Fall-Winter 1997 ad campaign. Also, I feel like these two dream men are foreshadowing someone we'll meet in season 3. As Charlotte mourns the life she doesn't have, Carrie goes to figure out where her life is going. She tells us this is the next day, so day 8. Miranda goes with her to Clyde Chemists, which used to be at 926 Madison Avenue. That space is now an Elise Walker shop. Carrie says to Miranda, I'm on total ovary overload. Which kind do I get? At first I was like, you're a 32-year-old adult. You know which one to get. But after I reflected on that, I decided that it was more about the stress of the situation that would make all of the boxes just blend together. She may be coherent and clever, telling Miranda, sweetie, I just spent $395 on a pair of open-toed Gucci's last week. This is not the place to be frugal. but she's not fully present, which is totally understandable. She picks up a first response, asking Miranda about it. Miranda responds, "Oh, first response. I remember first response. I had a very reassuring moment with first response." They have a fantastic exchange, swapping stories from their childhoods, and this is not going to be the last time we get this kind of exchange between these two, and I don't want to spend too much time on it right now, but this and Charlotte's Wishbox is such a humanizing moment for these characters that gives us a ton of insight into their backstories that we're not really going to get a lot more of. And real quick, I love the Louis Vuitton backpack on Miranda. We cut to Carrie's bathroom as she tells us, 5 hours and 2 packs of gum later, I decided I couldn't take the test until I knew exactly how I felt about the results. We see the first response next to the sink, as well as some, I believe, Kiehl's Silky Soft Talc-Free body powder, and some Laura Mercier cosmetics, maybe some powder foundation, since I think that's a bottle of liquid foundation above it. We also see 2 toothbrushes, which Carrie does not seem like a 2-toothbrush girl, so questions, but not right now. She's finishing up her mascara when the phone rings. She goes to answer it, and we see her fatal red maxi dress by Wolford. I also love her weird little slippers she wears as she gets ready. She answers the phone, and it's Lainey. Lainey says, I just wanted to tell you it was so great to see you guys the other day. Does she mean yesterday? I love that there's a giant jar of pickles on the counter. Also, you know that all of that fruit is plastic. Lainey also says, I know I was a big bitch, but you gotta know my hormones are going wild. Carrie tells us the truth is Lainey's hormones have been going wild since she was 10, and I don't understand the fourth break wall here. Granted, it would be odd to just have the voiceover with Carrie just nodding along, but this is the only time she does it this entire episode, so it stands out. Lainey tells Carrie how much she misses the girls and how much fun they used to have together, and tries to reestablish a closeness that I'm assuming they used to have. And what I'm guessing here, since Charlotte was not in the flashback, is that Lainey used to be their fifth, meaning they all used to go out to lunch and dinner together and watch movies in Carrie's bed together, but I'm going to talk about this more in the next scene. Carrie tells her about Samantha's party, which is kind of a shady thing to do, but I refuse to have sympathy for Lainey right now. That brings us to said party in Samantha's apartment. So again, this is the only episode with Samantha's living area. I'm guessing her bedroom is through those doors behind the bar, but as we get to know Sam more, this view of the rest of her space is kind of jarring, let's be honest. This is the same layout of her apartment in the flashback. I wonder if they shot in 2 different apartments in the same building, since the flashback living area had exposed brick walls, and we have white painted walls here. Carrie's apartment is on a soundstage, and I think the future apartments for the other girls will also be on a soundstage in the future, but these early season apartments all feel like they were filmed in actual locations. Anyway, Carrie tells us, faced with her own inadequacy, Samantha did something only Samantha could do. She threw an I don't have a baby shower to let everyone know she was fabulous. And I would so go to this party. Carrie points out Miranda, telling us, still convinced that marriage plus baby equals death, Miranda chose life, also known as Ed, Samantha's accountant. And I'm going to be controversial yet brave and say this is way too much PDA for a house party in your 30s. But this is the perfect time to talk about the second chapter that inspired this episode, chapter 11. I won't go into every detail, but it opens, bad things can happen to city women when they come back from visiting their newly married with children friends in the suburbs. The morning after Carrie, Miranda, Belle, and Sarah returned from a bridal shower in Greenwich, there were phone calls. Sarah had broken her ankle rollerblading at 4 in the morning. Miranda had sex with some guy in a closet at a party, and they didn't use condoms. Carrie had done something so ridiculous she was sure her short relationship with Mr. Big was over, and no one could find Belle. So obviously Miranda's PDA is inspired by the book, as is Sam's party, but I do appreciate that Carrie's story doesn't go into the book storyline. Don't get me wrong, I love the book storyline, but it's out of character for our Carrie. Yes, this sounds cryptic, but this isn't really the time to talk about it. Lainey shows up uninvited and out of nowhere. She hugs Sam and Carrie, and their reaction is the kind of reaction we should have gotten earlier. Lainey shouts at the party guests, hey you guys, the entertainment has arrived. The guy who looks at her next to Stink Eye is Ed, so what happened to Miranda? It actually looks like this reaction is supposed to be from later, which we'll talk about here soon. Either that or those two women are magic. Carrie sits Lainey down and Sam tells her she gives birth on that couch, she buys it. So the flashback is paying off. Anyway, Charlotte comes up, and let's give it up to Charlotte for actually standing up for herself, even if it took over 24 hours to do so. Lainey asks her what her problem is, and we get this exchange.
My problem Just that I had a dream and you killed it in a nutshell.
Carrie continues being the designated driver, only this time she's the designated Lainey Wrangler. I do love the fact that neither Miranda nor Sam makes it obvious that Carrie isn't drinking. They're both keeping her secret and not making a spectacle of it. Speaking of Miranda, she comes up for air, and we can see that she's wearing this amazing Vivienne Westwood dress, and I'll say it, so far, Miranda has the best accessories. Also, I don't know who this dress is by, but Sam also looks great. But since Charlotte is occupied by Jonathan Bix, she doesn't seem to notice that Carrie is staying sober. Speaking of Jonathan Bix, he's played by Blair Hickey, who won't have any other major roles after this, but I think Jonathan is really cute. I'm a little disappointed that Charlotte didn't date him, but he does look a little bit too much like Jack from Three's a Crowd, so never mind. Carrie tells us that Jonathan was a trader at Bear Stearns, which was one of the largest investment banks in the United States before it collapsed during the 2008 financial crisis, was bailed out by the US government, and then was sold to JP Morgan Chase. Carrie also tells us that Charlotte started to tape her dream house back together as... Where is Carrie looking? They're in the corner to her left. Now we get the infamous scene where Lainey tries to recapture her youth by shouting, "Hey you fuckers, who wants to see my tits?" She attempts her strip-teasing days as Let Me Run Wild by the Pristines plays, and Sam says, "This is at once so sad and the most fabulous validation I've ever gotten in my life." I love that we get the same angle from before in between her legs. Again, there are a lot of moments that we see at the beginning of the episode that pay off quite well here at the end. However, Lainey can't complete the striptease. Carrie tells us, despite her best efforts to run free, it appeared that Lainey Berlin's invisible electric fence stretched all the way to Manhattan. They help Lainey down, and Sam is still getting Lainey some water despite all of Lainey's behavior and their obvious rivalry. It's minor details like this that really add to Sam's character. Carrie escorts Lainey out to get her a cab. I couldn't pinpoint what street they're filming on, but this does not look like it's the same area that Sam will be living in the next time her building comes up as a plot point. Like, that's a lot of graffiti across the street, but we'll talk about this more when it's relevant. Carrie starts to put Lainey in the cab when Lainey turns around and says,
"I didn't know that was going to happen. Nobody told me that was going to happen. I mean, somebody should warn you. One day you're going to wake up and you're not going to recognize yourself."
And I have complicated feelings about this scene. On the one hand, we're supposed to dislike Lainey so much up to this point, but her behavior at the party complicates things. Cindy Chupak, who will join as an executive producer in season 3, said, "Before I worked on Sex and the City, I wrote for Everybody Loves Raymond. One day, one of the writers brought in a tape of this episode. We were all sitting around the conference table, and as we watched, one by one, all the men in the room got bored and went to lunch. I was left sitting there and I was crying by the end. I was so moved by how honest and complicated it was. Soon after that, I contacted Darren Star and told him how much I liked the show and that I would love to do an episode." And I think Chupak nicely sums up my feelings about Lainey in this episode. She's very much the villain, but just like in real life, villains are complicated and multi-dimensional and don't always fit into our idea of what a villain should be. I'll touch more on this in a moment, but I'm so glad that we got this final scene and send-off for Lainey. So apparently Carrie doesn't go back upstairs. We catch up with her and she tells us, "I spent the entire next day sitting on a park bench watching children play. If I had to, could I do this? Would I be any good? Would I somehow manage to stay me? On the way home, I got my period." So real quick, this outfit looks very similar to the one she wore to meet Big's ex-wife, but what is happening with her hair? And for the 90th time, that damn Fendi trench coat. I don't want to get too much into this scene since we're going to come back to this topic again in a later episode, and also because I just don't feel comfortable discussing what's probably going on in Carrie's mind right now. I will say that I appreciate SJP's vulnerability throughout this episode. This is such a tricky topic to bring up in such a young show, so I also applaud Terry Minsky's writing here. Who knew that the creator of Lizzie McGuire would write such an effective adult story? That's kind of where I want to leave things for this episode. This was such an emotional roller coaster for every character. We learned so much about Miranda and Charlotte. We got some iconic moments from Samantha. Most importantly, though, we got some incredible vulnerability and character development from Carrie, which has been slightly lacking. I also want to mention, but not dissect, the fact that we never see Carrie and Big actually discuss this topic. So put a pin in that. I probably won't bring it up again until this series is over, though. However, I do wonder how much of this episode would have been a column that Carrie would put out there. Like, she didn't tell Big any of this, so did she print it for everyone in New York to see? The lack of her actually working and typing this up makes me think that this is the only episode so far that doesn't correspond to a Sex and the City column published in the New York Star. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. I do love that we have an almost entirely female cast this episode, even though a lot of those females are depicted as assholes. We don't see Mr. Big this episode. The only man who speaks on camera is Jonathan, and that's only a couple of lines. This brings me to an observation that I want to end with. To me, one of the most fascinating things about this episode is its conflict between the traditional patriarchal housewife voice, which usually comes from Charlotte, and the contemporary non-traditional non-housewife voice that comes from a surprising source. While the focus of the mental grief comes from Carrie, since she's our main protagonist, the most complicated relationship with traditional femininity and women's roles is from the most unexpected main character, Charlotte. It's such a great way to flip expectations for us, which is important as we come to the final episodes of the season. Again, we saw a lot of building up towards something from the previous episode, and we're getting some great character development in this episode. That brings us to our BIPOC character count, which is still at 2, but that is the full breakdown of the 10th episode of Sex and the City, The Baby Shower. Please like the video if you enjoyed it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time.